Hey guys, and here to break down UFC 291, Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje for their B.M.F title, and Gaethje comes out the victor in quite a outstanding way. Obviously, not exactly the result I wanted, being a Dustin fan, but very impressive by Gaethje, to say the least. So Gaethje head kick KOs Dustin in the second round at 1 minute. Just so crazy that he landed it. I was a little bit when I was watching. I was just said, oh no, like, where do I start with all this? So I'll start with fight week, if I may. So during fight week, I did think that Gaethje had a very good attitude. He seemed to have his head in the right place. He seemed to look really healthy as well with his body. He's obviously stacked on that muscle, and he just looked fresh. Dustin, on the other hand, he looked like he was good mentally as well. His body looked a bit more gaunt, especially after the weight cut. I felt like Dustin's body looked really gaunt. And whereas Gaethje, even though he's stacked on the muscle, he seemed to his body seemed to be more he looked healthier. I think, and Dustin even admitted after the fight, he has sort of conditioned his body to cut weight so much now that I think his body's almost starting to become more and more gaunt, kind of like how Tony looks now. He looks so gaunt now from so many weight cuts. It's like your body's like, okay, we're not really meant to be carrying extra weight. We're just we always have to stay this weight. But I think it kind of deteriorates some of your muscles and tendons and ligaments. So I kind of felt like Dustin looked like his body didn't maybe hydrate back the same way it normally would, because I have seen him look bigger. Like, I think he looked bigger in the Oliveira fight. He looked bigger fighting Conor too. I think he's just getting a little bit older now. I'm not saying that's why he didn't show up, not at all, but it is a small observation that I've observed. Even though they're the same age, Dustin has been around the UFC longer, and I think he has had just a few more fights that really make the difference, a few more weight cuts. Whereas Gaethje hasn't really cut weight the same way, because Gaethje was never really killing himself to cut weight to make lightweight, but now he's decided to suddenly, okay, now I can bulk up more. So maybe his body hasn't been through so much punishment, and I think that has helped him now putting on the weight, because now he hasn't really, because he hasn't been sacrificing his body, and he just looked really big compared to Dustin. Dustin looked a little bit small, because Dustin has a big frame, but Dustin, his muscles didn't rehydrate. His body didn't really take to the rehydration very well, I would think. I just feel like he's maybe the weight cuts are starting to catch up on him. He says it was so easy to make the weight, but I think that's because he's conditioned his body to not take that weight. And Justin Gaethje, he just had a glow about him, and he looked a little bit more healthier. So that's one part of it. I think that Gaethje also mentally came into this fight maybe with a little bit more of a humble attitude, whereas Dustin has a bit more ownership of of his ego, and he's like, he kind of. I think that's why we love him, though, because he has a lot of pride, and not that Gaethje doesn't, but I think Gaethje came into this fight with the mindset of, well, I'll just do my best, and I think he was just just a tiny bit more humble than Dustin was. But also, one thing that I can take away from this event is that get out of fighting when you can. If you're 1% not in it, get out. I mean, look at Tony Ferguson. I mean, I'm not saying that he's not into fighting anymore, but fighting is so cruel. If you're not in your prime, if you are in your prime, let alone if you are in your prime and you're 1% like not into it. I mean, I could even argue that Tony Ferguson isn't 100% into it, because he's talking about his business, making those boxing equipment and all that stuff. How can he be 100% into his training camp when he's doing all this other stuff? And I think the moment that you're doing that is probably a good sign to maybe get out of there. I mean, have the fun fights, but you know, if you don't want, I don't know, it's tricky, right? I think Dustin was kind of in that area where I just feel like even though he was saying that he wanted to fight for the belt again, I don't think he really wanted to, not the way that GAETJE did. I think GAETJE is serious about that. Whereas I think Dustin wasn't really serious about that. And Dustin has expressed before that he wanted to retire, and he has expressed before that he doesn't enjoy, he's not in love with fighting anymore. Whereas I think GAETJE still loves it. And GAETJE has really evolved as a fighter. I think that's what really divided them in this fight. Dustin, he's kind of more of an old school type fighter now. He hasn't really evolved with the game. He has a little bit, but not to this current level. You've got to keep continually evolving your style if you really want to be in the title picture, I think, right now. And GAETJE has made those adjustments. He's really embraced things from the Oliveira loss, in my opinion. Even his footwork and the angles that he was coming from, he was able to get completely around Dustin's guard in a way that was just... No, I don't think anyone really saw that coming. Even in the final kick he landed and knocked him out with, he just completely went around the guard. He's definitely really improved there. Yeah, so I think that Dustin, I thought it might take a while for Dustin to get going. And I think GAETJE did the right thing by getting him out early, because I think the longer it would have gone, Dustin would have got a bit more confidence, because Dustin was still warming up in there. GAETJE was very intelligent when he got rocked by Dustin in the first round. He just sort of was patient and didn't do anything reckless, and he was very composed. And I think he was just throwing a nice diversity of attacks that he didn't really allow Dustin to get going. I haven't actually watched it back yet, but I was disappointed, obviously, with Dustin. But I feel bad for him, because it was an important fight for their careers, and now it's kind of like, well, Dustin, he has, you know, his last opponents that he's beaten, Conor, Michael Chandler, and Dan Hooker, and they're his last wins over the last few years. And when you think of it that way, it's like, well, GAETJE would have really been nice to top that off, to make him more of an elite lightweight. I think Dustin is elite, but he hasn't made those adjustments, and not the way that GAETJE has. And I think it's because Dustin, it's not that he isn't capable of fighting better. I think he just loves to fight his style. He loves his own style, but that's when you see people like Tony Ferguson get picked apart, because, which is another, which I'll go over. It's not exactly the same, because Tony's old as well, but if you don't want to keep changing your style as a fighter, you're never gonna keep up with the movement of the sport. That's just the way it is. And, you know, Dustin's been around longer as well, so I think he's just mentally a bit more fatigued and, you know, not into it the way GAETJE is. GAETJE wanted it more, so the right man did win, because GAETJE wants to fight for the belt again. I didn't really get that vibe from Dustin, even though he was saying that. Yeah, I just think GAETJE's hungrier. Still, like I said in my breakdown, Dustin's had his big moments, like beating Conor. There's such a big moment that I don't think he really needed anything more in a way. Whereas GAETJE, yeah, he's finally sort of had his moment. What was I gonna say? Oh yeah, look, I don't know a lot about GAETJE's personal life, but I don't think he has children yet. He obviously has a partner of some sort. For some people, I think it works for them not having kids, whereas others it helps. But it is proven that a lot of guys, their testosterone goes down when they do have children while they're young, because it's just natural for like a parent to want to be more engaging with the kids, to be a bit more gentle and a bit more, I don't know, parenty. So some men are affected by having kids around them, and I know Dustin loves his daughter, and sometimes that makes you a bit softer. And I know he doesn't have her in the training camp, but you know, sometimes being a parent does affect fighters in a negative way. Like I think it affected Usman a bit, because he has a very strong relationship with his daughter as well, and it just changes you. I mean, if you look at someone like Sean O'Malley, it's helped him, I think, but it depends. It's different for everyone, I think, especially for fathers at different ages. When their children are at different ages, it can affect them. So I think, you know, GAETJE is a good example of someone that has just completely focused on his craft. And it's worked for him. It's worked for him really well, because now like he's put all his energy into fighting, and whereas Dustin has put a lot of energy into doing charity, and he's more interested in the community stuff, and that's why we love him. But I think for Gaethje, he's probably got a bit more energy in the pocket because he hasn't had as many fights. He still wants that belt, like just as much as before, maybe even more than before. And he's doesn't have any other commitments that are taking away too much of his focus or time. I mean, he plays golf, but that's like a recharge thing for him. So yeah, I mean, overall, I was disappointed that Dustin had to get head kick KO'd in Salt Lake City. I don't think the altitude was really getting to him, not yet anyway. But yeah, I think the right man won. Yeah, so what's next for Gaethje? I think he should fight the next title fight against Islam or Oliveira, whoever wins. I do give Gaethje a better chance than before, actually. Just because I think we've got a bit more tape now on Islam thanks to Volkanovski, and Oliveira has had a lot of fights, even though he hasn't taken as much damage recently. I'll give Gaethje a bigger chance. He's probably still going to be the underdog, but I'd still give him a stronger chance. So that will be interesting. For Dustin, he said he was really only interested in big fights in the press conference. So we'll see. I would like to see him retire. Maybe take a few fun fights, but he can do what he wants though. But I don't know. Dustin's very inspirational. He's always has a lot of humility, and he just accepts things really quickly, and I like that about him. So I don't know, overall, pretty cool event, and yeah, I'm happy with that. Jan Blachowicz and Alex Pereira. I think I tend to disagree with what most people believe. I think Jan actually won this fight. I think it was kind of close, but I think that Jan didn't help himself with his body language. He looked like he just had really bad body language. Looked like he was really suffering, and he looked defeated. But if he just had different body language, everyone would agree, I reckon, that he won that fight. I think that the striking was pretty equal because Pereira did get a lot of leg kicks, and he did beat up the leg of Jan Blachowicz, but I think that Jan actually got the better of him with the boxing. And I think that Jan also had all that ground control time. And even though I was really impressed with what Alex did, I still give it to Jan at best. For Alex, a draw. So that was a little bit frustrating, but I do need to rewatch it back. Ultimately, I think Jan, his body language just lost him that fight. That's all I've really got to say on this one. I think Jan, maybe he was a little bit younger, a little bit hungrier, would have given it a little bit more effort, like he probably could have, but I think the altitude did affect him a lot. It must affect the bigger bodies, which makes sense. But it's kind of a bit more interesting to see Alex Pereira fight for a title, if that's what he can get, just because Jan hasn't really... we know it's not the best version of him, even though I still think he won this fight. So I think Jan, maybe think about retiring, although he's still got a lot of fight left in him. I mean, just because you can't get the belt, like if all he wants is the belt, then he probably should think about retiring, because I just don't think he has the same conviction as before. And for Pereira, it'll be interesting to see if he does fight Yuri. This was the highlight of the night, Derrick Lewis using a flying switch knee to pretty much knocked down his opponent. That's Marcos Rodriguez de Lima. Amazing comeback for Derrick, and I'm really happy for him. I think everyone loves this guy, so he really needed this win too after going on such a skid. So now his contract's up. Would be interesting to see if he actually does take a fight with PFL just to fight Francis Ngannou or something and come back. That would be fun. I think Derrick's pretty loyal to the UFC though, so I'd be surprised to see him leave the UFC and not re-sign with them. The fight was over pretty quickly. I can't believe that Derrick Lewis pulled off that switch kick knee. He looked very lean too, by the way. Switch knee, I don't mean to say switch kick knee. Switch knee. Bobby Green submits Tony in the very last seconds of the third round. Look, Tony did have his moments in there, and if only he did have Bobby Green rocked, I think in the first or second round, I can't remember. But then he just didn't finish it off, and maybe a younger Tony would have been able to get the job done. Someone really needs to try and convince Tony to stop fighting. It sucks because you can see that he has he is making adjustments and he is getting better and he understands it, but his body is not following his mind, or I don't know, he's he's just an old fighter now, and I think he will have a lot of success maybe against younger, less experienced fighters, but then again, I think he doesn't really have the same strength that he used to, and he just doesn't have the conviction. He seems to be just going on in slow motion all the time. I mean, he's quick when he does decide to go, though. He's definitely still got some hand speed, but he just doesn't have that same conviction. I hope that the UFC let go of Tony just because I don't want to keep seeing him fight. Maybe they'll give him like one last chance to fight someone who he could, someone definitely he can have more of a chance against. It sucks because you can just see that Tony's a really good fighter, but he's just over his prime now, way over, so you just gotta... I mean, does he really mean it when he says he's gonna go fight for the title again? Yeah, I would just like to see Tony maybe have one more fight if that's what he wants and then retire. But good luck to anyone who needs to tell him that. And lastly, Kevin Holland submits Michael Chiesa in round 1. This fight kind of played out the way I thought it might. I wish I put a bet on Kevin. I just thought it was Kevin Holland's fight to win. He kind of bested Chiesa everywhere. Chiesa hasn't been in the octagon for 2 years, so I thought Chiesa retired, but maybe he hasn't. Kevin looked really good too. He seemed to be more switched on, more focused and disciplined. So that was really... I think Holland could definitely make a run now if he puts his mind to it, keeps doing what he did in this fight. That'll be fun. Yeah, that's about it really. Just a quick one. Yeah, thanks for coming back, and I'll try and do a few more breakdowns and all that stuff, and yeah, what do you think about everything? See ya later, see you around the traps.